My name is Adam Kanal, and I am a collaborative composer. Join me in the search for a career in classical music. This is the Making Noise podcast. I'm so excited that you wanted to do this. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Totally. It's so funny. Like many composers, I'm sure I've been introduced to you through your YouTube channel.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
This is like the first time you and I have ever interacted.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm still seeing you through a screen, you know?
Yeah.
And you're still talking too, like in your videos, but you're talking to me now.
But that's the thing, is my videos aren't like, they're obviously a amped up version of my personality, and like when I'm talking about stuff, it's not what I would necessarily sound like if I'm talking to you in person, but it's not like I'm putting on a completely different persona.
Mm-hmm.
Like I am just as like nerdy about some of these things and very into it, and like when I'm talking a mile a minute about something that I'm really passionate about, that's not something that I exclusively do for camera.
Right. Yeah.
So like I can definitely say that if you meet me in person, I am different.
Mm.
But I don't think I made a point to try to be as genuine as possible in my videos and really not completely distort my personality.
Right. Yeah. I like that you brought that up. That's so interesting to think about, especially with people who are building or starting YouTube channels and stuff. Like when you first started doing it, what was that like for you, trying to get used to like talking to the camera and stuff?
So the funny thing is, the way I started making YouTube videos was actually, I used to be Tumblr famous. I started Tumblr in 2012 and kind of with a group of other people ended up founding what has become a classical music community on Tumblr. And I don't really use Tumblr anymore, so I don't really know what's become of it. But at the height of Tumblr, there was a classical music community of music students and people who wanted to become music students. And I was one of the oldest people in it, being an undergrad at the time. And because Tumblr is 15-year-olds for the most part. And I started making advice videos, and Tumblr had a 5-minute limit. So all you could do was 5 minutes. And I started making these videos about like rehearsal etiquette and like things to do in a practice room, or like bad things to do in a practice room. And then I started wanting to make longer videos. So I had to switch platforms. And in grad school in 2015, I switched over to YouTube and started making YouTube videos. So at that point, I was used to talking to the camera. And when I started doing it in 2012, it was kind of, I was talking to my phone, like vlogging style, like with the selfie, like holding it out myself. So it was a little more organic than it would have been had I started like straight out of, or when the start of my YouTube channel. If that had been the start of my video making career, it would have been different. But I guess I was just practiced by the time I was starting to do it for real. And so I was used to it and was better at like finding the words I needed quickly. And I used to not edit my videos at all. If you go back, they're one take wonders where I and I trip over my words, and you can see me starting and stopping the recording, and I didn't clip anything out. And as I got more into it and started doing it more and being more interested in it, I was like, okay, maybe I should, actually edit these videos and at least clip them so you can't see when I started and stopped the video.
All right.
The entirety of the 365 project has that. You can see like my hand go out to stop the recording. But yeah, it almost developed organically just from coming from Tumblr and coming from this like advice position in a music community, and then having to adapt just because of changing platforms.
Right. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So you had a good amount of experience with it on Tumblr, and then that just transitioned naturally into YouTube.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting. Like this past year, I've started to put more things on YouTube, and I'm completely guilty of what you just mentioned about like just like long takes where you're like looking at the camera and you're like, and then without the cuts and stuff. And it makes a difference. It's
Yeah.
actually crazy how big of a difference it makes.
Yeah.
Throwing those cuts in, that is.
Exactly. And I also got better at like being able to record a chunk at a time, so there weren't all these really awkward jump cuts where it looked like I was like pasting together a ransom note. So it also, like, the practice of talking at a camera for a long period of time about something that I wasn't always super coherent on until I started recording.
Mm-hmm.
My video making method, especially for the talking videos, is like, think of a subject, think of like 3 or 4 big points, and then just talk and see what happens. And so sometimes the video takes a left turn that I wasn't expecting, because my brain goes, oh, this is the thing that we should talk about, we should focus on that. And then suddenly this video that I was intending to talk about like practice techniques turns into a rant about like teachers not supporting new music. But then I just retitle it and it's fine.
I like that. Like you there's like a pivot that happens midway and you're like, yeah, I'll go with this. Then that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well,
That
no one's asking, like, apart from the video projects, obviously my content isn't prescribed. No one's asking me to do things. I'm not promising things are going to be scheduled at certain times. And I've kind of established that I will cover whatever I cover. So sometimes I will just talk at a camera for 10 minutes. Sometimes I will do a contemporary techniques video where I'm really like breaking down something. And sometimes it will be a playing video. And even if I'm not like in the middle of a project, I do still try to post like, I have the makeup music series, which is kind of whenever the pieces come in. And then I also will just like find a duet and play a duet with myself if I'm bored. Like it's all how I feel. So it doesn't feel like I have to make content. I actually like doing it.
That's fantastic. I like that a lot. I mean, it makes me think about with ensembles and stuff when they do things like team up with a brewery and do a performance where they match music with beer, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like you're like, oh, let me do that on my own scale within my the things that I can control, the resources I have. That's what I'm trying to say. The resources I have, and I'll do like a music and makeup thing.
Mm-hmm.
Clever. That's so clever.
I actually have a couple pieces I need to record, but other projects have gotten in the way. But no, it was just kind of thinking like, oh, this would be really fun. And I know a lot of the composers that I work with regularly are interested in my makeup and what I do with that. And so I was like, hey, do you guys want to do this? Like, this is super chill, and I don't want to put any pressure on anyone because I'm kind of asking you to write music for me about this thing that's very specific to me.
Right.
But also, if you want to do it, cool, I will happily record them.
That's great. That's really, especially in regards to the collaborative relationship, that really like I feel like it brings it out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or it would, at least. Like, have you found that at all? Or
yeah, and I mean, so the way I have that project set up, it's basically a Google form where it's like, do you want to do this? Do you want to use an existing look? Do you want me to like give you one? Do you want me to do something? Do you want me to like, if you have an idea, do you want me to do a makeup look that's based on your idea? And if it's one of the 2 more creative ones, then I just send them something when I have a chance. And basically was like, hey, give me a general idea of when you might be able to finish a piece, but also like, if you can't, we're obviously in quarantine and there's a lot of stress going on, so I don't want to put pressure on someone to create when it's not coming. And also I'm not necessarily going to be able to record them immediately either, so this is a very flexible relationship of like, hey, if you get me the piece, I'll eventually record it.
Right. So what has been one for you, like, because you're mixing learning these pieces and creating like creating makeup and everything. What's been the most challenging one for you?
So I've only recorded 3 of them right now, maybe 4, 3 or 4. I can't remember right now. But there, so Rachel Weyland, who's a composer she's at UNT right now. She asked me to do a like all glitter look and wrote a piece for piccolo based on like shiny and sparkly things. And one, it was quite technically difficult because piccolo music tends to be, and two, I was like, oh, I don't wear glitter ever. Okay, I have to find glitter in my collection to do this.
Oh wow.
So it was musically challenging and then also creatively challenging for me. So it's not something that I personally wear, kind of thing. But
I love how that was like the use of the piccolo is expanding your flute, like I don't want to say capabilities, but like I don't know, like what you would typically play. And then
yeah.
also the use of glitter is expanding your makeup, you know, like
Yeah. I play piccolo. I just recently I've pulled back from it, one because I live in a very small apartment and I'm very scared of people yelling at me.
oh yeah.
And two, it's because of the surgical issues I've had, it's very, very hard on my face to play. And so I've tried to avoid it just to give my face a little bit of rest.
Does it require more like tension in the
Yeah,
embouchure
it's a
or?
very tight embouchure, and because it pulls here, which is where I had surgery, it just hurts and it's not worth it.
Mm.
It's why 100 Days has no piccolo in it. It's just because I wanted to make sure that I was respecting my health as well.
Oh well, yeah, that's oh wow. Well, that also makes me think too. We don't have to go like with this podcast. We can go as long as you want or as short as you want. I don't want you to feel any like,
Oh no, you're
you
fine.
know,
Like
help.
it's totally fine.
Okay.
Um, it just like there's just like certain things that just tweak it, and I know what happens, and so I just don't do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Like, but yeah. Don't want you to
Yeah.
be
Oh
compromised
no,
in any way.
no, you're
Or
fine.
cool. Cool. Have you found that because you mentioned you're like there's a concern naturally with neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Has there been any complications when trying to like film a video or something?
So, not in my current apartment. My landlord once was like, "Well, someone complained." And it was 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Like they were trying to sleep, and I was like, "Well, okay, I'll move into my bedroom. That's fine." But also, like, feel free to let them know that they can ask me to stop. Like, if this person complains again, like, please, like, direct them to me, and I will work something out with them. I've heard nothing since.
There we go.
I make a point when I moved into this apartment, I made a point of like knocking on the doors of all my neighbors and being like, hey, here's my number. If I'm ever loud or doing something at a time where you really don't want it, please let me know. I'm try to be as respectful as possible, but I am a professional musician, so this is a thing that has to happen. But I also understand that stuff happens and sometimes you need silence. And no one's ever had a problem. In fact, my next door neighbor blasts classical music like 24/7 while he's working. So I really don't feel that bad about playing. I'm like, you just get extra music. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting more of what you're already listening to.
But in my first apartment in Chicago, our downstairs neighbors, I guess, could hear everything. I don't really know how, but fine. And they were livid at us. And I went down there and like, here's our number. Here's what we need to do. Can we use this time frame? We worked at like a 10 to 5 p.m. because both my roommate and I at the time worked nights. So we could practice in like the early afternoon and be fine. And they put up with us. But I saw the wife when I was leaving the apartment, like we were driving out in the U-Haul and she saw me and I could see on her face, she's like, oh, thank goodness this woman is leaving.
Oh,
so that was a bit of an interesting situation.
yeah. Was that one of the apartments that's like more of a house that houses like 6 different units or?
No, it was like a high rise. Each floor had 4 apartments and it was like 12 floors. And our upstairs neighbors were even louder than we were, and we never had a problem with that because we knew that we were creating sound. And none of the people on our floor ever had a problem, including the like guy who lived across the hall that could hear everything. Because I once like knocked on his door and was like, hey, is this okay? And he goes, oh yeah, I kind of like it. It's nice to hear you guys play. But this couple was not having it.
Yeah, they're not psyched on the classical music.
Yeah. Like, and my roommate played clarinet, so it's not like we had like brass instruments or drums or something like that. Like we were pretty low impact as far as sound goes.
Yeah, well, even like flute and clarinet are much more like delicate, I guess you can say, you know.
And they don't carry as much.
Right, exactly.
Like the
Yeah.
frequencies aren't as piercing, so I don't know.
Yeah, some people it's you can't do anything about it, you know.
Apartment living.
My girlfriend plays the oboe.
Mm,
So that can get pretty honky, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
We haven't had any complaints yet, but our neighbors are also they play music and stuff, and you know,
yeah,
so it's like one, you know, it's a balancing act, I guess.
exactly.
But
Yeah,
yeah, what about do you live stream at all?
I do sometimes. I've live streamed concerts, and I like try to, especially when I'm doing like a concert that has music programmed from one of the YouTube projects. I definitely try to live stream it because most of those composers have no access to Chicago.
Mm,
Some of them are not in the country, um,
right.
but I don't live stream very much. I kind of like the recorded video like system that I have set up. Um, I find that my mics fail more in live streams, and so I get more audio problems, and it's not worthwhile as far as I'm concerned for what I do. I do really appreciate the like uptick in live stream concerts because I can actually go see stuff now.
Mhm.
Um, and like we just finished Splice Festival 4, which was all live streamed because we can't be in person. And there were some really really interesting uses of video to because it was live streamed and we all knew it, and so some people did some really creative things with the videos.
Mm.
But yeah, no, I'm always curious about moving into Twitch and like doing some of that stuff. And I know, do you know Eric Heidbreiter at all?
I don't think so.
He's a bassoonist and he also is like a comedic singer. And he does these Oregon, or I haven't seen him do them lately, but he was doing these Oregon Trail live streams where they would play Oregon Trail on Twitch and he would have people come in and improvise music during it. Um,
Oregon
so there's
Trail,
some really,
like from the old video game.
yeah, like the old video game. um, so there are some really cool things that you can do with it. It's not, it would require a lot of like adjustment in my content and I'm not there yet.
Right. Yeah, I imagine the hardware has to be like, you know, mics or whatever and cameras and stuff. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I don't know, maybe not. I mean, yeah, you could just do it from the laptop as well, but
Yeah.
um
It's more just I don't know Twitch, and it's when you platform jump, it's always a little scary whether your audience is going to jump with you.
mhm.
So there's also that factor of my content is pretty much like stable YouTube content, and so it would be a bit of a character shift and a change to switch to Twitch, which is fine if that's something I want to do in the future. I'm not going to let it stop me.
Mhm.
Um, but for what I do right now, it's not really necessary.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and even that's a good way to think about artistically too, like making that sort of jump. It's like if you're a classical musician and then you're like, oh, let me try doing like blues, you know, like
Mhm.
it, is my audience gonna come with me,
Yeah.
you know?
And are they going to be interested? And also, there could be a completely different audience that you develop. But it's if you like the audience that you have, then you do have some responsibility to them, at least in terms of letting them know if something's going to change.
Mm,
If I don't think that your audience dictates your content. I don't think that's fair, and I think that creators are allowed to make the content they want.
mm.
Um, but you do want to give them a heads up and say like, hey, I'm going to try this thing now, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but this is something that I'm interested in now.
Yeah, I like what you said there about uh really just like pursuing whatever it is that you want to pursue. You know, because it's like for one thing, like why shouldn't you? You know,
Yeah.
especially if you're a creative person that has these sort of impulses and drives, and so it kind of makes me wonder, like with the because you've done a bunch of these sort of like challenges.
Yeah.
You know, like there was like the 365 days,
52
uh,
weeks.
52 weeks. Yeah. So like through that path, how have you because I know like with YouTube you can look at the analytics and see the
Yeah.
statistics and all that stuff. So like have you found that certain trends take place when you go through those projects at all, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, 365 is the easiest one to see the trends just because there's so many videos and it's such a wide variety of music that you can kind of see where people are searching. And my single most viewed video on my channel is an excerpt from Peter and the Wolf. It's the like the really standard flute solo that everyone kind of knows. And it's a random one-off day in the middle of 365. I think it's like 200 something. And it has 8,000 views.
There you go.
It's like a 1 minute long video. I don't even think it's that good of a performance of the excerpt, but I'm my own worst critic, obviously. And it just somehow the algorithm just liked it. And when people search like Peter and the Wolf flute, I come up really quickly. And that's true of a lot of the Shostakovich excerpts and the Prokofiev excerpts. Like the Russian school of flute playing apparently is very popular on YouTube. And like obviously the beginning and the end is always the most popular because people tune in at the beginning because they want to see it happen, and then when it actually finishes they're really excited to see that. And that's true with 52 weeks as well, but 52 weeks, because it was more of a workshop and like a process project and less just a challenge, doesn't have the numbers that 365 did, but that was also not the point of it. It was more like really giving composers access to a flutist who was actually willing to play their music and have the skills to be able to do it. Because what I found with 365 was that the composers that I was working with were really incredibly grateful to just have someone play their music, because some of these pieces had never been played and had been written 5 years ago. And it was just because they were somewhere where they didn't have access to a performer that had the skill set and interest.
Well, sorry for interrupting you. I just thank you on behalf of composers. Thank you for providing that resource, like, and the opportunity, really.
Yeah, because I think over the between 2016 and the end of 2018, I played 200 works by living composers through the course of 365 and 52 weeks plus gigs and things like that I was doing. And that's an incredible number of pieces for anyone in that time frame, especially, but even in a career, that's so much new music. And I wanted to be able to actually help composers, because a lot of the things that I've discovered just talking to composers and being at like festivals and doing composition workshops with composers is that the biggest thing that they don't get is performer feedback. They can get people to play their pieces, but you'll hear the performers bitching about it in the wings, and they won't tell the composer why there's a problem, and then they'll never play anything again that was written by a living composer. Whereas if they had just taken the 5 seconds to go, hey, I can't do this, here's what would be better, and like, can I please do this, or this sound doesn't work, I think this would be better, or even just, I don't know how to do this, can we change it? It would help composers way more. And it's such an easy thing on our part because we know our instruments better than you guys do. That's like what's expected of us. We've been playing for however long and like do this for a living. So it's only fair to like help people get better. And so I kind of just took it upon myself to at least help a little bit. And I have plans to expand the project, especially 52 weeks is kind of the basis for a lot of what I'm planning. It's just the world has not allowed me to act on these plans. But it'll happen eventually. Because I want to expand the model and bring in more musicians and have composers be able to play or to write from more instruments and different instruments, and hopefully chamber ensembles and larger ensembles in the same kind of collaborative workshop model that you get at a summer festival, but with the guarantee that the people are actually going to give you feedback. You don't have to pay and you don't have to travel, because I think those are the biggest limitations that people encounter, especially with festivals.
Yeah, well, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other opportunity that exists like that. So That's a
Yeah.
valuable thing right there.
Yeah, and considering that in 2018, when I did 52 weeks, I had 250 submissions for a project that clearly could only have 52 pieces. And this was before really anyone had ever worked with me. Like the 365 was this like novelty project that did obviously create a very large bank of pieces and performances that people could believe I could play. But no one really knew me in the community apart from people I went to school with. It wasn't as much as like now people have a tendency to be like, oh yeah, I saw your videos, or like I've used your videos for composition help, or like, oh yeah, you played my friend's piece. But at the time, it was pretty much like, hey, I'm a random flute player you don't know who wants to workshop 52 pieces with you. Um, let's see. And some of them were my friends, but a lot of them were people I had never met.
That's so
So
fantastic to have that that sort of like feedback for you,
yeah,
even, you know,
yeah,
like there's that's right there. It's like, well, you're doing something right.
yeah, exactly.
And like I said, definitely providing a great resource for
Yeah.
composers.
And it definitely proved that it was a model that worked, and it was a model that was worthwhile, considering that through the course of the project, every single person had something produced out of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
so we did something with every week, and some of these people are people I've continued working with now. Ralph Lewis is the easiest one to quote because I've worked with him so often. But his piece from 52 Weeks, we actually did a sequel to recently. We're talking about doing a third one because this particular piece uses the YouTube algorithm to like accompany itself. And so it's a really true YouTube piece. And we've made a sequel to it with clarinet as well. So there's also been so many opportunities that came out of it for collaboration after working with these people.
That sounds really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How does it use the YouTube algorithm? Like, what
Well,
is?
it's not the algorithm so much as the keyboard shortcuts.
Mhm.
But basically the number keys will jump through a video in equal increments. So if you have a 5 minute long video, the number keys will jump through 30 seconds at a time. So there's a flute piece that plays straight through with a score that pops up for number keys that you play. So you have two windows open. One is just playing the video straight through and you're following the score on that. And then you have a video that open that you're playing with the number keys and accompanying itself. So it uses the actual score material as the accompaniment to as the laptop part.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. See, like the composer side of me had to ask a question about that.
Yeah.
Like,
No. Like this is Ralph's brainchild. I just kind of figured out a way to make it work in terms of the editing and the YouTube logistics. But this was his idea. He wanted to create something that was truly a YouTube piece and knew that the keyboard shortcuts did that, and we figured it out.
super cool.
Mhm.
Totally into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's called Duotube. It's that one's in the 52 Weeks project, and its sequel is called Mox Tube because it was from Moxonic, the electroacoustic festival at I think it's Central Missouri State. I might be wrong there, but it's in Missouri, usually in March every year.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I'll definitely have to link those to this video in the
Yeah,
description.
they're very
People
they're
can check
cool.
it out.
Yeah.
What's something with working with composers? Like, because you know we've been talking about that a little bit. What's something with working composers that you're like, come on, guys, you gotta be listening here, or like, you know, thinking more about these sort of things, or
I mean, the thing that annoys me the most is notes that just don't exist on the instrument.
mm,
Like things that a textbook, like the Adler textbook, could tell you immediately. Because
does that
I
happen a lot?
yeah, especially on piccolo,
Yeah.
because piccolo only goes down to D, and we get a lot of like C and C sharp and
Mhm.
Bs, which don't like in they're written C4 and B3, but they spoken C4 or C5 and B4, because the piccolo starts at speaking pitch D5.
Mm.
There is a specific instrument that goes down to the low notes, but they're very specific. They're very hard to find because they're expensive. and that's a very niche market to write for.
Right. Yeah.
But like I have a lot of leeway with especially like avant-garde and extended writing, because there's so little codification of technique, especially for composers notation, that I can't blame you for using something weird unless you're using X note heads for anything other than key clicks. Those are key clicks. I'm sorry. It's my like one pet peeve with extended writing is that X note heads are key clicks. There's no other option.
Put your foot down on that one.
Yes. But basically, like I basically, when I see a score, if it is clear to me, and as long as there's words and there's a key and I know what's happening, it's fine. Like I will figure out what symbols you used for the things that I'm doing, because they're everyone uses them differently, and I can't blame you for having a different resource than the one that I learned, kind of thing. But it does have to be clear. If you just put random symbols on a page and don't give me any key or any indication of what the symbols mean, I'm going to walk away.
Right. Yeah, well, that, I mean,
yeah.
you can't be blamed for that either.
No.
If it's like if it's too challenging to like even navigate on your own, then
yeah,
you know, that's no fault with the composers, really.
Exactly. And I understand, like obviously I work in a very collaborative way, and most of the pieces that are written for me are written with consult from me or from my videos, which kind of codify how I want things to be notated. But I also am a very big proponent of these pieces need to have a life outside of my performance. And if I'm the only one who can read it, then is it really successful? Obviously, like I do a lot of flute and voice playing, and so there's a lot of pieces that are written with a very, very specific vocal range that fits my voice really well. So that's limiting in terms of who can play it outside of that, but that was a choice that we actively made. And someone with a similar vocal range can play this piece. It's just going to be harder to find someone who has a similar vocal range. That's a limitation, and that's something that we always talk about whenever someone's writing for flute and voice is like, hey, do you want this to be played by anyone except me?
Yeah.
Because you can really easily scare people off if it has like a low A in it and they are soprano. But there's also ways around that particular limitation, and like allowing for octave transposition and that kind of stuff. But if it's illegible, or only legible in my like specific coded language that I have been like writing in and reading in for as long as I can remember, then that's not fair either.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges with new music is there's no standard way of notating things. There's definitely certain conventions that are common, but not even like typical, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and I also noticed like across instruments, it's different.
Yeah.
Like within the woodwind family, especially like saxophone, especially just because they have such a wide range of contemporary sounds, flute notation and saxophone notation don't always line up, even for the same things. Because for flute, my typical like slap tongue or pizzicato notation is an accent note head. But from what I can tell, that is different for saxophone players. They're not as used to that, or they don't use it as much. I don't even like, I just remember seeing some posts on Facebook about saxophone notation and being like, that's not what I would ever read that as.
I think
the same sound.
Yeah. I've written quite a bit for saxophone, and I've used slap tongue in my music before. And I even like for me in my repertoire alone, I've changed the notation for it. And I don't think I've ever had a saxophonist tell me like this is not how we read slap tongue. Like I mean I've used like not cross note heads, but like a cross above the
I've seen that a lot.
Yeah. And like even the Bartok pizzicato, like the circle with the line coming out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Yeah. So there's like, it makes my mind twist a lot.
Right. And I think it's also, I kind of like delved into the world of like very avant-garde new complexity 1970s music by playing Fernie Howe. And so I also like I understand that notation better than a lot of others, just because I spent like a year of my life on that piece.
Sure.
And I had to be able to read it fluently to be able to effectively play it. And so now I kind of think in that notation, which is an older notation that a lot of people don't want to delve into, because Fernie Howe is scary and his scores are scary to look at. And so they don't always want to use those notations because they like imply this fear. And I also like the fingering charts are always different. Like there's so little codification. That's actually something that I would love to be able to have an influence on, is like, can we have something standard for some of these sounds that are not going away? Because you also have like Shirino techniques where he made them up with a flutist and like put them into a piece, and now they're standard somehow, despite the fact that the only person who ever used them previously was him. And so there's all these things that like I don't even know how to notate, because the only person who ever notated them is Skirino, and he was writing them for this person who he worked with directly.
Right.
So, yeah, it's I think to answer your question, my biggest like issue with composers is unclear notation.
You heard it here, crew, composers out there. Be clear about what you're notating when you're asking performers to do something.
Yes.
Yeah, even with the Shirino, because I think I know the technique you're talking about. It's like that, like
bird warble. Yeah, with the right hand trill key. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there's like a descending line or something, but it's like not actually descending.
And the only score I ever found it explained in only explained it in Italian. So my teacher and I spent like 45 minutes listening to recordings of pieces trying to figure out what the sound was, and eventually she was like, oh, it's the like this trill thing. And I saw it in a piece later on, and I just kind of messaged the composer and was like, hey, just so you know, like I know what this is, it's fine, but you probably want to explain this a little bit better than like Skirino trill in the score, because you literally, that's a kind of a deep cut in terms of not like flute knowledge. And if you have anyone who isn't a contemporary specialist playing this, and even someone who is a contemporary specialist playing this, they might not know what that is. And the composer was like, oh, I was just like studying this score and I thought it was really cool, and I didn't realize how unstandard it was. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. Please change that.
Well, that's great advice right there. I mean, as like I think especially when it comes to these sort of techniques, and you mentioned having a performer who's not as used to contemporary techniques, being able to explain the technical aspects of the technique, but also the sound of what is being produced.
Yeah.
You know, like, so how to do it and then what it should sound like.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when like some of these, just thinking about flute techniques, like sound and air techniques have so many variables, because how much air do you want? How little air do you want? Do you want a syllable on it? Do you want just straight noise air? Like what do you want? And I find that composers are never super clear about that. And so that's something that I've been kind of railing on recently, is like, hey, if you want to write air techniques, cool, but also like give us an idea of the sound world you're going for. Do you want a certain syllable on it? In which case, say which syllable. If you want it to be 50-50, literally say you want it to be 50-50, and it'll be a lot easier and you'll get a much better performance when the flutist isn't just like, okay, you want an airy tone. What kind of airy tone?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually a little bit of the issues I was facing with the piece that I had written in June, because I used quite a bit of air sounds in that. And like, I was like, well, how should I describe this, or how should I notate this, or to what, like, I don't have a flute, so how am I gonna, you know, like, a lot of those issues that we're talking about right now is exactly what I was experiencing.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. That's so important.
And it's one of the reasons that like I make the Contemporary Techniques 101 and the Contemporary Techniques for Composers series, is just there's so many things that you would never think about until you're using them, and then suddenly it's a really big problem because you don't know what to do with them. That it makes sense to have some kind of resource available for composers and also for flutists, to figure out how to learn how to do some of these things, how to write some of these things, and also how to communicate to each other what the problems are. Because that's another thing too, is like there's composer speak and there's performer speak, and it doesn't always line up. And being able to translate to each other what you're trying to express can be very helpful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I know what you're saying. It's so interesting to kind of see that too. Like when you're so in your world, and then when you speak to someone like a composer, they have their language of saying things, and like you're so trained in your instrument, you're like, oh yeah, you mean this key, and it's like, I think so.
Yeah. And it's funny is like I've spent so much time with composers at this point, and like through school most of my friends were composers, so despite the fact that I don't write that much for myself, I do speak composer essentially. And so it's a lot easier for me, just because I like know what these words mean, and like not quite my aesthetic is usually I really didn't like this piece but I don't want to say it kind of thing.
Right.
Like coded terms for that composers use to not insult their friends.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's some ways around it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think bridging the gap between composer and performer, and really creating more collaborative spaces and more symbiotic relationships, rather than just like, here's the piece, here's the recording, we never discuss this ever again.
Right.
Is better than the previous model where it's like you play the thing and then you never talk about it again.
So with that, like when you're working with a composer, especially if it's a new composer, how do you how do you start those conversations with them? I mean, do you like send them a whole spreadsheet like, hey, this is my stuff, this is what I do, or like?
So I mean, usually if someone's writing for me, I'll be like, hey, just let me know if you need help, like if you have a question about something. And then if they send me the piece and there's issues with it, then I'll like email them and be like, hey, here's some things, like, do you want me to do this? This is unclear. I think you mean this. Do you mean this? It really just depends. And I think there's also, at this point, I have so many resources available that people have a pretty good idea of what I'm looking for. So I haven't had as many like glaring issues. And sometimes there's just like, hey, I don't know how to do this. What were you going for? Because I can adjust it and make the same sound essentially. And I mean, right now I'm going through 100 Days, which is a little bit more of a whirlwind because I don't have the chance to like workshop these pieces, and I can record them and then send the recordings on to the composers, but there's not as much time for like feedback. But I do try, if there's something that I really thought was weird, or if there was something that was uncomfortable or could be really easily adjusted, I'll send a note and just be like, hey, I really appreciated this. Like, here's the recording. Also in measure 12, you might want to change this to this, or like, this is a little unclear. I did the best I could, but like, just so you know. But if someone's like writing something for me for a very specific purpose, then we'll be a little bit more collaborative and a little bit closer. It really just depends on the situation and the way that the piece is being produced.
Right. Yeah. Sort of the nature of how that relationship is going to pan out.
Exactly.
I guess. Yeah. I know. Yeah. Some composers, it's a little bit more like they need to work behind closed doors and then bring the piece out. Or in some composers, it's like, let's hang out, let's have some beers, and let's talk about this. You know?
Yeah. Or even like I have a couple pieces that I got sent in pieces. Like they would send me like, hey, can you like record this just so I can hear it? And then I would not hear from them for a little bit, and then they'd send me something else, and then they'd send me that, and then the piece would come back looking nothing like anything I had ever recorded, but cool. But yeah, there's so many different working models for composers that you can't really just say like, oh, this is how you do the thing. But it's definitely like being open and being able to say, hey, if you have questions, please let me know. And like I right now, my friend and I are working on the alto flute multiphonics to try to figure out ones that can alternate quickly. And rather than write ones that he thought would work, we're just gonna find ones that work and write those.
That's great.
but then there's also people who write stuff for me and then just send it to me and then I record it, and we never really need to talk about notation or anything like that. So I kind of leave it open and go from what the composer wants and also what the piece needs.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I think that's really, really great about what you offer and what you do, which is so evident even in this conversation, is like you're so interested in making sure that composers are able to effectively communicate what it is that they're writing and stuff. And I mean, even I can attest to it, that you're so inviting and welcoming and open to trying new things, just even through correspondence. But if there are composers out there who are interested in working with you, what is something that, like, how should they contact you? Or and even in that, like, what is a way that someone's contacted you where you're like, no, that's not how you start this?
So to be perfectly honest, I don't really care how you contact me. Like, I get Instagram DMs with composers being like, hey, can you look at this piece? And I'm like, yeah, sure, cool. I like contacts through my website, Facebook. Like, I really don't care, as long as I'm not referred to as Mr. Meiksins, because that's like that's the quickest way for me to be like, yeah, no, you didn't look at anything I do.
That's happened, huh?
Like, gender is a social construct, but I kind of express my gender pretty clearly.
Right. Yeah.
That was a fun development when the 365 started popping off, is I got like 8 or 9 emails addressed to Mr. Meiksins, and that was an immediate like turn off. The only thing that really pisses me off is like that, or misspelling my name, especially when you're coming from my website, which has my name plastered all over it. Sure. My last name is a difficult last name. It's hard to spell. Also, Robin with a Y is a very common name, but take the time to please figure out whether my name is right or not, because I find it very disrespectful, obviously. But that's really the only thing that's ever like made me not want to work with someone. I guess also like not asking for my help and then not listening to me. Like there's one piece, and I won't say exactly which one because I don't really want to call this composer out, but there was a technique that I didn't know how to do. I was struggling mightily with it and kind of asked, can I adjust this? Because I really find this difficult, and I think that maybe having an alternative would be great because this is a very difficult technique. And he basically said, no, you have to figure it out. And I did, and he's just not someone that I really particularly want to work with again.
Well, there's a lot of good stuff in there that you brought up. I mean, for one thing, like the professionalism of addressing someone properly and exactly like how their name and everything, that's like basic right there. Not to say that what you're saying isn't important to mention, because it definitely is,
No. And I have no problem with just being like, having an email address to hello Robin, like, yeah, fine, you don't have to use any kind of titles or anything like that. But as long as if you get my name right, I will actually continue reading.
I had a sort of similar experience, and I won't get into what the context of it was, and I definitely made a mistake on my part, so like that's, I'm at fault in some degree with that. But the person who I was corresponding with via email, my name is Adam, Adam, right? The following 2 emails after we were corresponding was, hi Aaron and hi Alex. And I realized that they were specifically trying to like stick a knife in and turn it a little bit just by, addressing me with the wrong name because they weren't getting what they wanted.
Oh.
Yeah. So I logged that name in my head and I won't forget who they are. And anytime, so that does matter. It is important.
Yeah. And I also I will say the contemporary music world is small.
Oh yeah.
And if you've made a bad impression on someone that I really respect, I am going to be more wary. I'm never going to write someone off based on other people's experiences. I don't think that's fair. But there are some people that I have a little bit of a question mark about. And if they approached me in a way that I didn't like, if they approached me in a very aggressive or a very like direct way, I might be more worried about working with. And there's also some composers that I just have had too many like not great experiences with, just with their rehearsal etiquette and the way that they interacted with people, that I'm like, okay, I guess if you pay me enough, I'll do it. But
right, yeah.
considering that I really do offer a lot of my services for free, maybe not.
Well, there's so much in this right now that like it sounds like a lot of this conversation is sort of centered around just how you function and develop the professional but also a personal relationship with who you're working with.
Yeah.
That's so important, clearly, and it matters a lot. I mean, like you're saying, how there's composers who might just be inflexible. Is that the word?
Yeah.
I gotta be, I don't know what the word is, but like the one you mentioned with that technique where you're like, I'm not certain about this. Can we try something different? And they're like, no. It's, you know, that affects things. That affects people. That affects like your future like prospects or opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, it also breaks the trust.
Yeah.
Because I do see these relationships as like trusting relationships. I trust you to trust me to be able to play your music. But the trust, it also goes back with me like trusting that the composer will listen to me and will respect my limitations. And so when that kind of thing happens, that trust is broken and I'm no longer as willing to like work again. And I would never bomb a performance or not do a recording just because a composer was rude to me. But again, it does change my relationship moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. And how important that is. Yeah, I kind of can't get over that right now. Actually, I don't know why, but I guess I'm just glad to hear you saying all that, because maybe I'm starting to realize it more and more with the relationships that I have with the people that I work with and everything. And like, yeah, it's just so important. And yeah, the value that's brought between like, because the composer, like our music isn't possible unless someone performs it, you know? I mean, unless you're writing like electronic music or something like that.
But even then, like you still, there's still a creative element, and it still has to be programmed somehow.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But how important that is. And it's sort of interesting because so you have your YouTube channel that a lot of this stuff is really kind of, I don't want to say filtered through, but that's how it's like
produced and put out into the world.
Yeah. So you have a large exposure there and everything, versus just sort of like intimate performances in like a concert venue, you know? And so how has having your YouTube channel, how has that affected your relationships and interactions with composers who you work with, or really anyone, not even just composers, like musicians or even general fans?
I mean, it definitely has changed. It definitely has expanded my relationship with composers, just because I have like internet friends, essentially, like people I haven't really met, or maybe there are a few people that I've like met in my travels who I've worked with, who we met up because I was there. But I have kind of a network of composers that I trust, and that if I needed something, I'd be like, hey, do you have a flute piece I can program? Like, I'll send you a recording kind of thing. And most of them will let me play their music. And so I have like a huge library of music that I have access to, which was a huge advantage. But it's also, it kind of has changed my perspective on the music world and creation in general. I'm very much interested in like a more hybrid career, partially online and partially in person, because I don't think that like in-person music should go away. But I do think that the internet is a very valid creation space, and it can be used as a creation space rather than just like an archive. It's it is something to be used for its benefit, and like we're in the modern era, like we're all millennials and Gen Zers and whatever you want to call us, like we're part of the internet era, and I find that classical music doesn't really embrace the internet. And so I've kind of found myself as like a pioneer and a crusader for some at some points for the internet being a valid place to present music. And amusingly enough, or not, COVID has kind of COVID has allowed people to realize that I was right. For better or for worse, like I've been doing this for a very long time, and for a while there were a lot of people who kind of were like, oh yeah, she's just like that internet person, like cool, like does these crazy projects, like it's kind of a gimmick. But now I think people are starting to realize that like it is a very valid place to have a career or part of a career. And yes, I don't make money on my YouTube channel, but the reach and the audience that I have created gets me actual paying jobs and has allowed me to work with festivals and to do all these collaborative projects that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise, just because my connections are larger and I also have a huge library of performances to prove that like I can play as well as talk.
That's such a great point. The exposure aspect of it,
Yeah.
And like you said, like the reach and everything. Like even though you're not making any money off of your YouTube, it's providing you those opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you'll hear that a lot in the new music community, where it's like, oh well, we can't pay you, but you'll get exposure. Often that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, this is different, because it's actually like no one's offering you the opportunity to do YouTube. You are. You're creating it yourself.
Yeah, like I would much prefer to create my own exposure than hope that someone else's rubs off on me.
Oh, that's I have to say how beautiful it is to hear you say that. Like I think it's important, because a lot of people, the competitions and call for scores for composers, and it's like people get frustrated that there's like a fee to enter, you know, which is a valid frustration. But at the same time, the people holding the competition, they're offering an opportunity, and they have to pay the people who are affiliated with that opportunity, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm kind of going off into something now.
But... I mean, yeah, but yeah, no, it's like I'm happy to play in tiny venues and play weird shows. Like I'm not gonna say I'm above that in any way. It's half of what I do. And it like I definitely do still play in person. But I also have this opportunity to do so many other things that, I mean, it's not like I would be able to do that if I were only working in person. There's pieces that I would never be able to perform in person because I don't have speaker systems. But when I can like rig a max patch to record and then like layer the video, I can play live electronics pieces from my living room. And like and without needing someone on the mixer to help with levels and feedback and everything like that. So it also creates more opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise.
That's so great. Yeah, yeah, wow. I'm curious with with all the projects that you do. I mean, because like you present all these opportunities for composers, but also creating opportunities for yourself, you know, like the 52 weeks, and now you're doing 100 days of new music, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, how do you balance all these projects? And then just even with like, because you work, before we started this conversation, you were saying that you work at a pharmacy and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so how do you balance all of that?
So, I mean, when I first started doing these projects, I was working nights and really didn't have a social life. I had just moved to Chicago. I didn't know anyone apart from my roommate. So it didn't feel that bad or weird to be stuck in my apartment practicing all day. It kind of just felt like I was actually doing something. Because 365 came out of my like general feeling of not not being worth the move. I was living in Chicago. I wasn't playing at all. I like wasn't practicing. I didn't have any gigs. And while I knew it was going to be hard moving to a new city and like doing all this stuff, I didn't really realize until then that it was really, really going to be difficult. And so I came up with something that would force me to do something. I didn't really intend it to be what it ended up being, but I just kind of needed to practice. 52 Weeks was kind of a passion project and a way to collaborate with composers in a way that I wasn't feeling like I could, because again, didn't know a ton of people, was in Chicago and trying to create build connections, and was at that point. But also, I mean, it takes a long time to find people in a city, especially in a city with so many people and so many composers and so many music students, that this random person who moved from Indiana isn't going to track as much just because they know people who they went to school with. And of course they're going to choose those people over this random person they don't know.
Right.
The more recent projects I have used as a chance to like really work back into my playing. I unfortunately have had a lot of medical issues over the course of 2019, 2020. And so I've had to take a lot of time off, and have used particularly the two 30-day projects, or 31 day as the case may be, projects as a chance to be like, okay, here's a Kickstarter and an easy thing. They were all graphic scores or improvs, so they didn't have as many limitations or like technical facility things that I had to do. And like let's just kick back into playing. And this one is a time suck, and it does take a lot of energy, and it is a lot of planning and timing, because I am working full time. But this one is kind of important just because it really does feel like my actual comeback and not just a placeholder. And I wanted to do something real. I wanted to do something big, and I haven't been able to play like this much new music in a long time. 60 pieces is a lot. And 40 improvs. And this one, I guess I just kind of do it. It isn't something that I think about until it's after the fact. It's always just been like, okay, this is the time I'm cutting out to practice. This is what I think I can accomplish in this time. Let's find a piece that I think I can accomplish in this time and do it. And if I am really struggling and don't have a lot of time, I have an improv I can do, which is why I included the improvs, because those are a lot easier to film, obviously. But it's kind of sheer will, I guess. More than anything, it's just stubbornness and like, no, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to work because that's the only thing that can do.
Oh, Robin, I love that. That's like, that's one of the hardest things I think for people is when they're out of school and they no longer have someone being like holding them accountable because a grade is involved.
Or yeah, exactly. Or a concert that you have to be ready for,
exactly,
or a recital or whatever it is.
Yeah, you're creating these specific like time bound things for yourself, like holding yourself accountable in a way.
Yeah, and I mean like I don't do these projects just for the publicity and just for the like fame or whatever you want to call it. They are developmental for myself. I actually just talked about this at Splice Festival yesterday. Like I make them so that they push me in some way. Right. Like the improv project was a chance to test myself, because my improv skills were developed in the last couple of years and were something that I was very uncomfortable with. And so from like 2017 to now, I have made myself improvise in public and have been doing more of that. And so the 30 Days of Improv challenge was basically like, hey, let's put this to the test. Can you do this? And are you comfortable putting up things that you don't love? Because that's the thing with improv, is sometimes they don't go the way that you want them to. And
yeah,
but that's also part of the magic of it. So like that, it was a you have to do this thing. The graphic scores was a mental capacity thing of like, oh, well, let's do some interpretation and not just like play other people's music directly from the page, but like really interpret stuff. And this one is a challenge. It's also trying to get my chops back up. I used to be able to sight read almost anything in 3 hours, and that has definitely gone away. So let's try. I'm trying to get some of that skill back, and also just practice for 100 days straight. Because I have my issues with the 100-day practice challenge that kind of floated around Instagram for a long time. But there is something to be said about playing for 100 days straight if it's with a purpose.
Right.
My issue with the challenge is more that people just kind of did it and didn't really think about it. And I think you should think about these challenges before you do them, and do them with intention. But 100 days is a very significant amount of time. And that's a lot of you can produce a lot and you can grow a lot in that time.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a little over a quarter of a year. You know, that's like 3 months and however long.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about not just doing the challenge, but what the purpose is for doing it. And I think to tack onto that as well is how heavily are you, how do I say that? How intense is your focus while you're doing that thing? You know, because it's one thing to sort of passively, like it's like an exercise challenge, you know, which I think is a pretty popular thing, is to take on certain exercise challenges. And it's like, you could be doing the exercises, but are you doing them properly? Are you doing them in a way that triggers the muscles so that they're effectively being used? And
long enough.
What's that?
Are you doing them for long enough?
Exactly.
Yeah. So yes, there are days where I play for 5 minutes, but it's 5 minutes with intention to record a video that has to go on the internet, which means I have to be okay with it. It can't just be me messing around for 5 minutes. It does have to be a focused 5 minutes. And then there's some days where I practice for 3 hours because the piece is really hard and I can't get it recorded.
Right. Yeah.
But it's always active practicing, and so that is so much better than just kind of going, okay, well, I need to practice today, and then you play like some scales while watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
Not to say that I haven't done that.
We all do that. Don't worry. We all do.
I don't want to shame the scales in YouTube practice session, but sometimes you do want to play with intention.
Yeah, it has its place at you know, there's times for it. Yeah. That's that's funny. Yeah, with improvisation, and you mentioned being okay with just putting it online and putting it out there. And I think that also that like translates into improvisation itself, where it's like being okay with what you just did.
Yeah.
How have you gotten to the point where you feel comfortable with that?
I honestly don't really know. I think it was just doing it. Like it was just practicing being uncomfortable. As I was working with Splice. So Splice is an electroacoustic institute and festival that is based out of Kalamazoo, and the festival rotates locations. So the 2018 institute had a theme of improvisation. And Dana Jessen, who's this incredible contemporary bassoonist, and Sam Pluta, who's a composer based at University of Chicago, were the guest artists. And they're both incredible improvisers. And they basically just threw us in a room. We're like, okay, you two, you have to do this thing where you can only play high and you can only play low, and you have to play with each other. And so that I see that as a turning point of being told I had to do something, and other people being uncomfortable around me, but still doing something, and getting used to it being uncomfortable. And then when I came back, there's a trumpet player that went to Indiana with me who's based in Chicago, Matt Riggin, if you know him.
I don't think so.
Okay, but he's an incredible improviser, and because he does free jazz, he and I are very close to the border of jazz and classical. And so he was like, hey, do you want to do some improv shows? Like, I think it'd be really fun, knowing what I do and what he does. And so we started doing some like duo improvs, which are safer and easier to do because you can, if you feel uncomfortable, you can hide behind someone. Like you can start hiding in their sound. And at some point I stopped hiding a little bit and started like leading him. And at some point I started also improvising myself more, because solo improv is definitely the hardest of the forms of improv. And at some point I found sounds that were comfortable and they were in my happy place, and I could go back to those if I felt uncomfortable rather than hiding behind someone else. So even though I was using my comfort zone, I was still able to lead and to push and to develop sound. And so I guess that's what happened is I found ways to make myself comfortable in my uncomfortableness because I could explore the instrument and I knew where things sat in my instrument. And so I became more confident in trying things.
Wow, there's so much in there that is so useful, I think, for especially a lot of classical performers, because they're so used to reading notated music, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not like, I'm definitely one of those. I actually went into my master's thinking I was going to be an orchestral musician.
Right.
I had always loved new music and I had always worked with composers, but it wasn't until my master's where I really realized that this was what I wanted to do. So I had never improvised. I like literally wouldn't do it. And to the point where like if I had something in a contemporary piece or even in band where they have like a little aleatoric box, I would write it out.
Right,
like,
right.
I would plan it out and I would have something written that I could play. And so it's been a very interesting discovery that I actually really do enjoy improvisation. And so there was someone who was asking me recently, like, how do I self-identify as like performer, composer, whatever it is? And I was like, I think I'm a performer improviser now. I think I can say that. Whereas I used to always just say I was a performer.
That's it's an interesting spot to sort of be in a way. I mean, because like especially in new music, you know, there's such a demand on the amount of things that you need to be doing at one given moment. You know, it's like play this note with this rhythm and this amount of air present, and then bend the flute as you do that. You know, like, and I imagine like that's sort of where improvisation actually can translate into improvisation pretty well.
Yeah.
Because now you're actually, in my mind at least, and please like correct me on this, but like I feel like it's providing you a lot more tools to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also, I think I talked about this in a video recently, but I kind of make improvs into etudes. So if I'm struggling with something or like I really want to focus on pitch bending or multiphonics or something, instead of finding an exercise, because those don't really exist, especially with the contemporary sounds, I'll start improvising and really focus on that. And if it's good and I like it, I'll post it and fine. And if it's not, if it just sounds like an etude, then cool. But it flexes two muscles and it works in different bunch of different ways and is much more engaging to me than like a technical etude.
That's great. Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. I mean, it's funny because like, I mean, as we were corresponding via email, you know, I was mentioning how like with these podcasts and stuff, like I don't really have a general plan as to what everything we're going to talk about, but there are some things that I think would be interesting. And what I love is like, so far we've talked about things that are applicable for both composers and performers.
Yeah. And I think that like, I don't write a ton. I do write a little bit of flute music, but it's mostly for myself and like very specific to what I do. But I have spent so much time around composers and I do understand the mindset and like the stress that you guys have, that I try to, as I've said before, bridge the gap of like, we are all scared and stressed and worried about stuff, and I'll have very like esoteric careers to look forward to. And if we can work together rather than against each other, it works better. It's more fun.
Whew, I love that. That's fantastic, Robin. I feel like what a great spot right there. I don't want to, but I feel like that's a good spot to end the conversation. Um, Before we do though, is there anything else that you want to tag on, or like something you want to say to people, like one of the projects you have coming up or your current project? Or
I mean, well, so right now I'm doing 100 Days of New Music. It's 40 improvs and 60 works by living composers. That is on my YouTube channel, and it will be posting until whatever day 100 is. We're on day 11 today, so it's gonna be for a while. And yeah, I love working with composers, and I like creating resources with composers. And I think it would be really cool to see more people doing it, and focusing a lot more on creating resources for the modern era rather than living in the past, which is a problem that most musicians have just because of the nature of the way we play. But we have to evolve and we have to change, and we need to be on the forefront of that because that's the only way we can.
wow.
But yeah, my social media is all Robin Meiksins. So if you want to check out what I do, I am pretty easy to find. And yeah.
Well, awesome. That's a great spot right there. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.